On a quiet Sunday afternoon, my 8-year-old granddaughter leaned close and whispered that my own daughter was planning to send me to a nursing home by tonight. What they didn't know was that I held a secret worth millions, and by the time I was done, they'd regret ever underestimating me. My name is Margaret Doyle, and at 48, I thought I'd seen enough of life's cruelties to armor myself against any fresh wounds. I was wrong. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my modest colonial home in Portsmouth, Virginia, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floors that Patrick and I had refinished together 15 years ago. Sophie sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, one of the few expensive things I allowed myself to display her small fingers working methodically through a 1,000-piece puzzle of the Eiffel Tower. At 8 years old, she possessed the kind of focused determination that reminded me painfully of her grandfather. "Grandma," she said without looking up, her voice carrying that peculiar gravity children sometimes adopt when they're about to shatter your world. "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking last night." I set down my teacup, the delicate china making barely a whisper against the saucer. "Oh, what about, sweetheart?" Sophie's blue eyes, Patrick's eyes, met mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. She glanced toward the hallway, then leaned closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "They said they're taking you to the old people place tonight, after I go to sleep." The words hit me like ice water. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The old people place. A nursing home. Tonight. "Are you sure that's what you heard?" I managed, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. She nodded solemnly. "Daddy said you can't take care of yourself anymore, and it costs too much money to keep checking on you. Mommy was crying, but she said okay." Sophie's small hand found mine. "I don't want you to go away, Grandma." I squeezed her fingers gently, my mind racing while my heart shattered. Emily, my Emily, whom I'd rocked through countless nightmares, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid without question she was planning to ship me off like unwanted furniture. And Ryan, that calculating son-in-law who'd been circling my supposed vulnerability like a vulture for months. "Don't worry about that right now," I told Sophie, forcing a smile. "Let's finish your puzzle." But even as we worked together, fitting piece after careful piece, my mind was assembling a far different picture. The subtle changes in Emily's behavior over the past year suddenly made perfect sense. The shortened phone calls, the way she and Ryan exchanged glances when I mentioned feeling tired, Ryan's pointed comments about the burden of caring for aging parents, the brochures I'd glimpsed in Emily's purse last month, glossy pamphlets for affordable senior living solutions. They thought I was becoming a problem, a financial drain, a helpless old woman who needed to be managed and contained. The irony was so sharp it nearly made me laugh. If only they knew what was sitting in safety deposit boxes and investment accounts across 3 states. If only they understood that their struggling mother-in-law could buy the finest nursing home in Virginia, or better yet, the entire chain without making a dent in her carefully hidden fortune. Patrick had made me promise to keep our wealth secret. "Let Emily find her own way," he'd said during those final weeks in the hospital, his voice weak but his conviction absolute. "If she knows about the money, she'll never learn to stand on her own feet." I'd honored that promise for 3 years since his death, watching my daughter struggle with Ryan's poor financial decisions, biting my tongue when they complained about money troubles, playing the role of the modest widow scraping by on Social Security. But this betrayal changed everything. At 3:30, Emily and Ryan arrived to collect Sophie, all smiles and casual conversation. Emily hugged me a little too tightly, her embrace lasting a heartbeat too long. Ryan barely made eye contact, fidgeting with his car keys like a man eager to escape. "We'll see you soon, Mom," Emily said, and I heard the lie smooth as silk in her voice. "Of course, darling," I replied, kissing Sophie goodbye and watching my granddaughter's worried face disappear behind the car window. As their taillights vanished around the corner, I stood in my doorway feeling the weight of absolute clarity settle over me. They had underestimated me in the most fundamental way possible. They saw a vulnerable woman who needed protection from herself. They were about to discover exactly how wrong they were. The quiet house suddenly felt electric with possibility. I had perhaps 4 hours before they returned with whatever papers they'd forged, whatever lies they'd constructed to justify their betrayal. 4 hours to begin turning the tables on two people who'd forgotten that the woman they were trying to discard had survived 48 years by being considerably smarter than she appeared. I walked to my bedroom and pulled Patrick's old leather briefcase from beneath our bed. Time to remind my daughter and her husband that in a game of chess, it's dangerous to assume your opponent is just another pawn. The cracks in my relationship with Emily hadn't appeared overnight. Like most family fractures, they'd started as hairline fissures that widened gradually, so slowly that I'd convinced myself they were temporary stress marks rather than structural damage. Emily had been my miracle baby, born after 3 miscarriages that nearly broke Patrick and me. For 22 years, we'd been inseparable. She was the daughter who called me every morning before work, who brought me soup when I had the flu, who insisted I join her and her college friends for dinner because, Mom, you're way cooler than their parents. When Patrick died, Emily held my hand through the entire funeral, whispering that we'd get through it together. Then she met Ryan. I should have seen the warning signs during their courtship, the way he subtly steered conversations away from family topics, how he'd check his phone when Emily told stories about our traditions, the barely concealed impatience when she'd call to check on me. But Emily was glowing with new love, and I didn't want to be the suspicious mother-in-law casting shadows on her happiness. The changes started small after their wedding. Emily's daily calls became every other day, then twice a week, then sporadic check-ins that felt more obligatory than genuine. When I asked if everything was all right, she'd laugh it off. Ryan says I baby you too much. Mom, he thinks we should both be more independent. Ryan's influence was surgical in its precision. He never directly criticized me or forbade Emily from seeing me. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt wrapped in concern. Your mom seems a little forgetful lately. Don't you think? It's probably hard for her, rattling around in that big house alone. Maybe she'd be happier somewhere with more social interaction. I watched my confident, loving daughter transform into someone who second-guessed every instinct about our relationship. The woman who used to bring Sophie over for spontaneous Saturday adventures began calling first to make sure it's convenient. The daughter who once shared every detail of her life started offering vague responses about keeping busy and managing fine. But it was the financial manipulation that cut deepest. Ryan had a gift for making their money problems feel like my responsibility without ever directly asking for help. He'd complain loudly about credit card bills when I was visiting, then apologize for burdening me with their stress. He'd mention casually how expensive Sophie's activities were becoming, then quickly add that they'd figure something out when I offered to help. The most insidious part was how he convinced Emily that my offers of assistance were somehow unhealthy. Your mom needs to stop trying to solve all our problems. I'd overheard him say during one visit, it's not fair to either of you. She needs to focus on her own future, and we need to learn to stand on our own. It sounded reasonable. It sounded mature. It was complete manipulation designed to isolate me from my own daughter. The warning signs had been escalating for months. Last Christmas, Emily had seemed distracted and distant, cutting our visit short because Ryan wanted to leave early for his family's celebration. In February, she'd canceled our traditional birthday lunch, claiming she had the flu, though Sophie later mentioned they'd gone to the movies that day. By spring, our conversations had become stilted exchanges about weather and Sophie's school progress. The most chilling moment had come just 3 weeks ago. I'd arrived for one of my increasingly rare visits to find Emily and Ryan huddled over paperwork at their kitchen table. They'd quickly shuffled the documents away, but not before I glimpsed letterhead from something called Golden Years Care Solutions. When I'd asked about it, Ryan had smoothly explained they were researching options for a friend's mother. Now I understood. They hadn't been researching for a friend. They'd been shopping for my prison. The phone calls I'd been receiving lately made perfect sense, too. Friendly representatives from various senior services organizations, ostensibly calling to offer free consultations about planning for the future. I'd assumed I was on some marketing list. Now I realized Emily and Ryan had been feeding them my information, building a paper trail of my supposed need for assistance. Even worse was the gradual campaign to make me doubt my own competence. Ryan's concerned comments about my driving, Emily's worried observations about my forgetting conversations I was certain had never happened, their gentle suggestions that I was overdoing it when I mentioned routine activities like grocery shopping or yard work. They'd been gaslighting me, systematically undermining my confidence while positioning themselves as loving family members reluctantly facing a difficult reality. The performance was so sophisticated that I'd begun questioning myself, wondering if perhaps I really was showing signs of decline that I couldn't recognize. But Sophie's innocent revelation had shattered their carefully constructed narrative. There was nothing wrong with my mind. I wasn't a burden who needed managing. I was an obstacle to their financial plans, and they'd decided to remove me from the equation. The cruelest irony was that if they'd simply been honest about their money troubles, I would have helped them. Despite my promise to Patrick about keeping our wealth hidden, I would have found a way to ease their burden without revealing the full extent of our fortune. My love for Emily and for Sophie would have trumped any other consideration. But they'd chosen deception over trust. They'd chosen to see me as a problem to be solved rather than a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her family. As I sat in my quiet living room, the afternoon shadows growing longer, I felt something cold and determined crystallize in my chest. They wanted to play games with my life, my freedom, my relationship with my granddaughter. They were about to discover that I was far better at games than they'd ever imagined. It was time to remind them that Margaret Doyle was nobody's victim. The leather briefcase felt heavier than I remembered as I carried it to the kitchen table, its worn surface scarred by decades of Patrick's travels to patent offices and agricultural trade shows. Inside lay the carefully organized documentation of a fortune that Emily and Ryan couldn't even imagine. Patrick had been brilliant in ways that most people never recognized. While his colleagues saw him as just another agricultural engineer, he possessed an intuitive understanding of how technology could revolutionize farming. In the early 2000s, when precision agriculture was still a foreign concept to most farmers, Patrick was already 3 steps ahead. His first breakthrough came with a soil moisture monitoring system that could predict irrigation needs with 97% accuracy. The patent applications were filed in 2003. Just as water conservation was becoming a critical issue across the American Southwest. Within 18 months, every major agricultural equipment manufacturer wanted licensing rights. But Patrick was too smart to sell outright. Instead, he negotiated royalty agreements that would pay us percentages of every unit sold, every software update, every technological improvement based on his original designs. Think long-term, Margaret. He'd told me as we signed the first contracts. This isn't about getting rich quick. This is about building something that lasts. He was right. The royalty checks started modestly a few $1,000s quarterly, but as precision agriculture exploded across American farmland, our income exploded with it. Patrick used those early profits to fund his next innovation's automated pest detection systems, drone-compatible crop analysis software, and weather prediction algorithms that could forecast optimal planting conditions up to 6 months in advance. By 2008, we were receiving over $30,000 monthly in patent royalties alone. Patrick insisted we live exactly as we always had modest house. Used cars, careful budgeting. To the outside world, we were a middle-class couple making ends meet on an engineer's salary. In reality, we were accumulating wealth faster than we could spend it. Emily needs to find her own way. Patrick had insisted whenever I suggested helping with her college expenses or contributing to her wedding fund. If she knows about this money, she'll never develop real independence. Look at all those trust fund kids, they never learn to value work or appreciate what they have. So we'd continued the charade. I'd paid Emily's tuition from what appeared to be our modest savings account, claiming we'd been putting away a little each month since she was born. When she'd needed a car, I'd found a great deal on a reliable used Honda. For her wedding, I'd presented a check that seemed generous but not suspiciously large, explaining we'd borrowed against Patrick's retirement fund. Meanwhile, Patrick was systematically investing our real income. He'd studied finance with the same methodical intensity he'd applied to engineering, diversifying our holdings across real estate, blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and international markets. By the time he was diagnosed with cancer in 2021, our portfolio had grown to over $12 million. "Promise me you'll keep this secret until Emily truly needs it," he'd whispered during one of our final conversations in the hospital. "Not once it needs it. When she's facing real hardship, not just inconvenience. When she's learned to value family over money." I'd promised, holding his hand as machines beeped softly around us. After his funeral, I'd continued our careful masquerade. The patent royalties kept flowing now, generating over $40,000 monthly as sustainable agriculture technology became essential to modern farming. Our investment portfolio had weathered the market fluctuations better than most, growing to over $14 million by last year. I'd maintained the fiction perfectly. To Emily, Ryan, and everyone else in Portsmouth, I was Margaret Doyle, the widow scraping by on Social Security and a small life insurance payout. I shopped with coupons, drove a 7-year-old Toyota, and complained about rising grocery prices with convincing authenticity. But the documentation spread across my kitchen table told a different story. Bank statements showing balances that Emily couldn't fathom, investment summaries listing holdings in companies she'd recognize from Fortune 500 lists, patent renewal notices for technologies that were generating millions in annual licensing fees worldwide. The most ironic part was that Emily and Ryan's financial troubles were entirely self-inflicted. Ryan's history of poor decisions, the failed restaurant investment, the underwater mortgage on a house they couldn't afford, the credit cards maxed out on luxury purchases had created the debt spiral that now threatened their stability. Emily's teaching salary was perfectly adequate for a reasonable lifestyle, but Ryan's expensive tastes and grandiose schemes had turned modest means into constant crisis. I could have solved their problems with a single wire transfer that wouldn't even register as a significant expense. $14 million in assets meant their $180,000 debt was pocket change, equivalent to someone with $10,000 in savings paying off an $800 credit card bill. But they'd chosen to see me as the problem rather than approach me as potential solution. They'd decided that warehousing me in a cut-rate nursing home was preferable to honest conversation about their struggles. They'd calculated that removing me from the equation was easier than swallowing their pride and asking for help. Most unforgivably, they'd involved Sophie in their deception. My granddaughter had been living with the stress of their financial anxiety, apparently eating cereal for dinner when her parents were too distracted to cook proper meals, wearing clothes that no longer fit because new ones weren't in the budget. The thought of that sweet child worrying about adult problems while her parents plotted to abandon her grandmother made my blood boil. Patrick's voice echoed in my memory. When she's facing real hardship, not just inconvenience. When she's learned to value family over money. Well, Emily was certainly facing hardship now, but she'd failed the second test spectacularly. Instead of valuing family, she was preparing to discard it. Instead of choosing love over money, she was choosing convenience over connection. As I organized the papers back into their protective folders, a cold satisfaction settled over me. Emily and Ryan thought they were playing chess with an amateur. They were about to discover they'd challenged a grandmaster who'd been planning her moves for years. The game was just beginning, and I held all the pieces that mattered. The clock on my kitchen wall read 4:15 when I made my decision. If Emily and Ryan planned to return after Sophie's bedtime, probably around 8 or 9 o'clock, I had roughly 4 hours to disappear before they could execute their plan. 4 hours to transform from victim to strategist. I moved with the methodical precision Patrick had always admired, packing only what I absolutely needed, a small suitcase with 3 days' worth of clothes, my jewelry not because of its modest value, but because each piece carried memories I refused to leave behind. Patrick's watch, which I wore on a chain around my neck, the family photos from my dresser. Most importantly, I gathered every financial document from Patrick's briefcase, along with the additional papers I kept in our bedroom safe: account numbers, investment portfolios, patent documentation, insurance policies, the entire paper trail of our hidden fortune. If Emily and Ryan thought they could declare me incompetent, they'd need to account for assets they didn't even know existed. I called a taxi rather than taking my own car. The last thing I needed was for them to track me down through some parking lot camera or nosy neighbor who'd noticed my Toyota missing. When the cab arrived at 4:45, I locked the front door with a finality that surprised me. After 3 years of widowhood in this house, I was walking away from the life I'd built with Patrick. But I wasn't running. I was repositioning. First Citizens Bank on High Street, I told the driver, settling back in the worn vinyl seat as my neighborhood disappeared behind us. The irony wasn't lost on me that Emily and Ryan's betrayal was forcing me to abandon the modest widow performance I'd maintained so carefully. They'd pushed me into revealing exactly the kind of woman they should have been afraid to cross. The bank's safety deposit box section was nearly empty on a Sunday afternoon, just myself and a security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper. Box number 417 had been my sanctuary for 3 years, containing the documents too sensitive to keep at home: additional investment statements, duplicate patent papers, and most importantly, the detailed financial records that proved exactly how substantial our assets had become. I spread everything across the small table in the viewing room, photographing each document with my phone before organizing them into a leather portfolio. $14.2 million in total assets, generating roughly $58,000 monthly in passive income. Emily's teaching salary for an entire year was less than what I earned in 3 months from Patrick's innovations. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text message from Emily. "Hi, Mom. Hope you're having a nice, quiet evening. Ryan and I have something important to discuss with you later. Could you make sure you're home around 8:30? We'll bring dessert. Love you." The casual tone, the false cheerfulness, the assumption that I'd be sitting obediently at home waiting for them to upend my life. It was masterful manipulation wrapped in emoji hearts and exclamation points. Emily had always been good with words, but I'd never seen her deploy that skill so cynically. I typed back, "Of course, darling, looking forward to it." Let them think I was the naive target they'd planned for. Let them arrive with their nursing home brochures and forged documents and rehearsed speeches about what's best for everyone. They'd find an empty house and start to understand that they'd gravely miscalculated their opponent. By 6 o'clock, I was checked into the Hampton Inn downtown, an anonymous business hotel where I could disappear into the background of traveling salespeople and budget tourists. I'd requested a room on the 3rd floor with a view of the parking lot, old habits from Patrick's security-conscious nature. Always know your exits. He'd taught me. Always be prepared to move quickly. From my hotel room, I called Thomas Blake, our family attorney. Thomas had handled Patrick's patent applications and helped structure our investments to minimize tax exposure. More importantly, he was one of the few people who knew the full extent of our wealth. "Margaret," his voice carried surprise and concern. "Is everything all right? It's unusual to hear from you on a Sunday evening." "Thomas, I need to ask you something confidential. If someone were to challenge my mental competency hypothetically, what kind of evidence would they need?" The pause that followed told me everything. Thomas Blake hadn't survived 30 years as an estate attorney without developing finely tuned instincts about family conflicts. "That's a very specific hypothetical question," he said carefully. "Are you concerned about something?" "Emily and Ryan are planning to have me declared incompetent and committed to a nursing home. Tonight. They don't know I'm aware of their plan." "Jesus, Margaret." The professional calm cracked slightly. "Are you somewhere safe? Do you need immediate legal protection?" "I'm safe for now, but I need to understand my options. Can they do this without my consent?" "It's complicated. In Virginia, They'd need medical evidence of cognitive impairment, testimony from multiple witnesses about your inability to care for yourself, and a court hearing where you'd have the right to legal representation. It's not something they could accomplish overnight, even with sympathetic doctors and falsified evidence. Relief flooded through me. So I have time to fight this. More than time. Margaret, given your actual financial situation and the fact that you're clearly competent enough to recognize their scheme, any attempt to declare you incompetent would backfire spectacularly, especially if they've been lying about your assets or their motives. We talked for another 20 minutes, with Thomas outlining various legal strategies and defensive measures. By the time I hung up, I had a clear understanding of how to turn Emily and Ryan's plan into their own destruction. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Emily, all within the last 30 minutes. The texts that followed told the story of their growing panic. 7:22. Mom, we're here, but your house is dark. Are you okay? 7:31. Your car is in the driveway, but you're not answering the door. Getting worried. 7:45. Please call us back. We're concerned about you. 7:53. Mom, this isn't like you. If you don't respond soon, we're calling the police for a welfare check. I smiled as I read that last message. Calling the police would create exactly the kind of official documentation that would work against them later. Let them explain to officers why they were so concerned about a woman who'd simply chosen to spend Sunday evening away from home. Instead of responding to Emily, I sent a single text to Sophie's phone, a device Emily probably didn't even realize her daughter carried. Having an adventure, sweetheart. Don't worry about Grandma. See you very soon. The response came back within minutes. Are you okay? Grandma, Mommy, and Daddy are really upset. I'm perfectly fine. Better than fine. Actually, sleep well tonight. From my hotel window, I could see the lights of Portsmouth spreading out toward the naval shipyard and the Elizabeth River. Somewhere out there, Emily and Ryan were discovering that their carefully laid plan had already crumbled. They'd expected to find a confused, frightened woman ready to be led docilely into captivity. Instead, they'd found an empty house and the beginning of a lesson they'd never forget. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was just getting started. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a sleepless night spent planning war. I'd been awake since 4:30, room service coffee growing cold as I researched private investigators on my laptop. Patrick had always said that information was the most valuable currency in any conflict, and I intended to be very wealthy indeed. Linda Grant's website looked professional without being flashy, exactly what I wanted. 23 years as a Norfolk police detective before starting her own investigative firm. Specializations in financial fraud, domestic disputes, and elder abuse cases. The testimonials painted a picture of someone who understood that families could be more dangerous than strangers. I called her office at 8 o'clock sharp. Grant Investigations. This is Linda. Ms. Grant, my name is Margaret Doyle. I need to hire you immediately for a family matter involving potential fraud and conspiracy. I see. Are you in immediate physical danger, Mrs. Doyle? No, but I'm in immediate legal danger. My daughter and son-in-law attempted to have me committed to a nursing home last night without my knowledge or consent. I have reason to believe they've been planning this for months. The pause was brief but telling. Where are you calling from? The Hampton Inn downtown. I'll pay whatever your standard rates are, plus a substantial bonus for immediate action. I can meet you in an hour. Room number. Linda Grant turned out to be exactly what I'd hoped for, a compact woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that missed nothing. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in a shorthand that probably dated back to her police days. What exactly do you want me to find? She asked when I finished. Everything. Their financial situation, their communications about me. Any evidence that they've been laying groundwork for this plan. Phone records, email trails, medical consultations, nursing home visits, anything that proves premeditation. That's extensive surveillance. It won't be cheap. I opened my purse and placed $5,000 in cash on the hotel room table. There's more where that came from. How quickly can you work? Linda's eyebrows rose slightly at the money, but she didn't comment. For this kind of comprehensive investigation, 72 hours minimum, but I can get you preliminary information within 24 hours. Perfect. I also need you to document my granddaughter's living situation. If they're neglecting her while focusing on their schemes against me, I want proof. Understood. One more question: are you prepared for what I might find? Sometimes family investigations reveal things that can't be unknown. I thought about Sophie's worried face yesterday afternoon, about Emily's increasingly distant behavior, about Ryan's barely concealed resentment during every family interaction. Ms. Grant, they tried to steal my freedom based on lies. I'm prepared for any truth that helps me protect myself and my granddaughter. She pocketed the cash and stood to leave. I'll start with financial records and public communications. You'll hear from me tomorrow morning. After Linda left, I spent the rest of Monday gathering my own intelligence. I drove past Emily's house 3 times, noting the overflowing mailbox and the lawn that clearly hadn't been mowed in weeks. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I positioned myself across the street from Sophie's elementary school and watched my granddaughter walk out alone, her backpack dragging behind her as she trudged toward the after-school program building. No parent pickup, no carpools with friends, just a 8-year-old girl managing her own daily routine because her parents were too consumed with adult problems to provide basic attention. That evening, I called Emily. Mom. Her voice carried relief and barely suppressed hysteria. Where have you been? We were worried sick when you weren't home last night. We almost called the police. I decided to visit my college roommate in Richmond. I lied smoothly. It was a spur-of-the-moment trip. I'm sorry I didn't call. You know how I get when Janet and I start reminiscing. But your car was in the driveway. I took the bus. You know I don't like driving on the interstate at night anymore. The pause told me she was calculating whether my story held together. When are you coming home? Tomorrow afternoon. Why is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong. We had something we wanted to discuss with you. Maybe we could have dinner tomorrow night. That sounds lovely. Dear, should I cook, or would you prefer to go out? We'll cook for you. Ryan's been wanting to try that new recipe he found online. Another lie, delivered with Emily's trademark warmth that had once been genuine. I wondered when my daughter had become such an accomplished deceiver, and whether I'd simply been too trusting to notice the skill developing. I'll look forward to it. Kiss Sophie for me. Of course, Mom, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. The words still came naturally, despite everything. That was perhaps the cruelest part of their betrayal. I did love Emily, desperately and completely. But love without respect was just another form of vulnerability, and I'd been vulnerable long enough. Tuesday morning brought Linda Grant's preliminary report, delivered over breakfast in the hotel restaurant. She slid a manila folder across the table with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Your instincts were correct, she said without preamble. They're in serious financial trouble, and they've been planning this for at least 6 months. The documents she'd assembled painted a devastating picture. Credit card statements showing over $180,000 in debt, mortgage records indicating they were 3 months behind on payments, phone logs revealing multiple calls to Sunset Manor and Golden Years Care Solutions budget nursing facilities with reputations for minimal oversight. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails between Emily and Ryan, obtained through what Linda diplomatically called technical methods. The messages revealed a calculated campaign to document my supposed mental decline, complete with shared strategies for witnesses and medical consultations. They've been keeping a log, Linda explained, pointing to a printed email thread. Every conversation with you, every perceived confusion or forgetfulness, every time you've seemed tired or distracted, they're building a case file to support incompetency proceedings. The final email in the thread, sent just yesterday morning, made my blood freeze. Had to abort mission last night. M wasn't home. Trying again tonight. Doctor. Williams confirmed he'll provide the necessary medical opinion if we can document concerning behavior during home visit. Remember to record everything. They'd found a doctor willing to rubber stamp their scheme. They were planning to record our dinner conversation, probably editing it to make me appear confused or incapacitated. The nursing home paperwork was already prepared, waiting only for forged signatures and falsified medical testimony. "There's more," Linda continued. "I documented your granddaughter's situation yesterday afternoon and evening. She was alone from 3:15 until 7:45, when your daughter finally came home with takeout food. The child was doing homework by herself, had apparently fed herself a lunch of crackers and juice, and was wearing the same clothes she'd worn to school the previous day." The protective fury that rose in my chest was so intense I had to grip the table edge to steady myself. They were neglecting Sophie while plotting against me. They were failing as parents while positioning themselves as concerned caregivers. "Ms. Grant," I said quietly, "I want you to expand your investigation. I want everything: financial records, communications, evidence of child neglect, documentation of their conspiracy against me. Money is no object." She nodded grimly. "I thought you might say that. I've already started the comprehensive workup, but Mrs. Doyle, you should know that what they're attempting could constitute elder abuse under Virginia law. When you're ready to fight back, you'll have significant legal ammunition." As I walked back to my hotel room, Linda's folder clutched in my hands like a weapon. I felt the last vestiges of hesitation evaporate. Emily and Ryan had declared war on my freedom, my dignity, and my relationship with Sophie. They were about to discover that Margaret Doyle didn't just fight back. She fought to win. Tuesday afternoon. I sat across from Thomas Blake in his law office, watching his expression shift from professional concern to genuine amazement as I outlined my plan. The mahogany-paneled room felt like a war council chamber, which was exactly appropriate for what I had in mind. "Yeah, you want to buy the house next door to Emily's?" Thomas repeated, his pen hovering over his legal pad. "Margaret, that's a rather dramatic response." "It's a strategic response," I corrected, sliding the property listing across his desk. 18 Maple Street went on the market yesterday morning. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, corner lot with clear sightlines to Emily's house. The asking price is $420,000. Thomas studied the listing, his attorney's mind already calculating implications. "You're talking about a cash purchase, I assume?" "Full asking price. Cash, no inspections, closing within 10 days. I want to send a message that can't be misunderstood." "And that message would be?" I leaned forward, my voice carrying the steel that Patrick had always said reminded him of his own mother. That Margaret Doyle isn't going anywhere, that I'll be watching, that every move they make from now on will have consequences. The house purchase was only the first part of my counterattack. While Thomas began preparing the real estate paperwork, I outlined the second phase, establishing a trust fund for Sophie that would be completely beyond Emily and Ryan's reach. $4 million, I specified. Irrevocable trust, with Sophie as the sole beneficiary. She receives access at age 25, with provisions for educational expenses and emergency medical needs before then. Emily and Ryan have no authority over the fund, no knowledge of its existence until Sophie reaches majority, and absolutely no legal claim to any portion of it. Thomas set down his pen and stared at me. "Margaret, do you understand what you're saying? $4 million represents nearly 30% of your total assets? That's an enormous commitment." "It's an investment in my granddaughter's future independence. Emily and Ryan have proven they can't be trusted with money or with family responsibilities. This ensures that Sophie will never be held hostage by their poor decisions." "But if Emily discovers the trust exists?" "She won't. The trust will be established through a subsidiary corporation, with you as the trustee and a Virginia bank as the administrative agent. Sophie won't even know about it until her 21st birthday, when she'll receive a letter explaining her inheritance and the conditions for accessing it." I pulled out a folder containing detailed specifications I'd drafted during my sleepless hotel nights. "I want specific performance clauses written into the trust. Sophie must complete high school and either attend college or establish a legitimate career path. She cannot access the principal for frivolous expenses or to support other family members' debts. And most importantly, if Emily or Ryan attempt to coerce her into signing over any portion of the trust, the entire amount transfers immediately to charitable foundations. Thomas reviewed my notes with the meticulous attention he'd always applied to Patrick's patent agreements. This is sophisticated financial planning, Margaret, but it's also nuclear warfare in terms of family relationships. They declared war when they decided to warehouse me in a nursing home, I said flatly. I'm simply choosing the battlefield. The third component of my plan required more delicate handling. I needed to revise my will in ways that would serve as both protection and punishment, creating consequences that Emily and Ryan wouldn't discover until it was too late to change course. I want Emily's inheritance structured as a conditional bequest, I explained. She receives the bulk of my estate only if she meets specific behavioral requirements over the next 5 years, maintaining regular, respectful contact with me, ensuring Sophie's well-being and education. No attempts to manipulate or control my living situation. And if she fails to meet these conditions, then her portion of the inheritance transfers to Sophie's trust, doubling the amount available to my granddaughter when she comes of age. Emily will receive only a token bequest enough to make it clear the exclusion was intentional, not an oversight. Thomas was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the implications of what I was proposing. Finally, he looked up with something approaching admiration in his eyes. Margaret, this is brilliant, ruthless, but brilliant. You're essentially making Emily choose between short-term financial convenience and long-term family wealth. The harder she tries to control you, the more she'll cost herself and her daughter. Exactly, and the beauty is that she won't know about any of these consequences until my will is read. She'll spend the next 5 years thinking she's manipulating a helpless widow, never realizing that every cruel action is costing her millions of dollars. By 4 o'clock, the legal machinery was in motion. Thomas had contacted the seller's agent about the house purchase and begun drafting the trust documents. The will revision would take another day to complete, but the framework was established. Within a week, I would own the strategic high ground and have secured Sophie's future beyond Emily and Ryan's reach. The house purchase would close on Friday. The trust would be funded by the following Monday. My revised will would be signed and notarized by Wednesday of next week. But tonight, I had a dinner invitation to accept. Emily and Ryan were expecting the same helpless woman they'd tried to ambush 2 days ago. Instead, they'd be dining with someone who now held every advantage and was prepared to use them all. As I drove back to Portsmouth from Thomas's office, I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. Patrick had always said that the best engineers were those who could turn constraints into advantages, who could look at impossible problems and find elegant solutions. Emily and Ryan had given me an impossible problem how to protect myself and Sophie from people who should have been our greatest allies, but they'd also given me something more valuable than they realized. They'd given me clarity about exactly who they really were and exactly what they deserved. The house at 18 Maple Street would close on Friday. By Saturday, I'd be unpacking in my new home with a perfect view of their front door. The war was about to begin in earnest, and I intended to win decisively. Tuesday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. I stood on Emily's front porch at exactly 6:30, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the same modest cardigan I'd worn to a dozen family dinners over the past year. To any observer, I was simply Margaret Doyle, the aging widow arriving for another quiet evening with her daughter's family. They had no idea they were about to dine with their executioner. Emily opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, pulling me into a hug that lasted a heartbeat too long, the embrace of someone checking for signs of frailty or confusion. "Mom, you look wonderful. How was your trip to Richmond?" "Refreshing," I replied, stepping into the familiar chaos of their living room. Toys scattered across the floor, bills stacked on the coffee table, the general disorder of people living beyond their means. "Where's my favorite granddaughter?" "Sophie's upstairs finishing homework. She'll be down for dessert." Ryan emerged from the kitchen, his greeting equally artificial. "Margaret, Great to see you. I hope you're hungry. I've been experimenting with that new recipe all afternoon. The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Linda's surveillance had documented him picking up takeout from Olive Garden at 5:15. But I smiled warmly and complimented the amazing aromas coming from the kitchen. Over dinner, they performed their roles flawlessly. Emily asked concerned questions about my health, my sleep patterns, whether I'd been remembering to take my medications. Ryan inquired about my finances with transparent casualness, wondering if I'd considered streamlining my living situation now that the house felt so big and empty. I gave them exactly what they expected: a slightly confused older woman, occasionally forgetting names or dates, expressing vague concerns about managing household tasks alone. I even dropped my fork twice and apologized for being so clumsy lately. What they didn't notice was the small digital recorder in my purse, capturing every word of their carefully orchestrated performance. They were so focused on documenting my supposed decline that they failed to realize they were providing evidence of their own conspiracy. Mom, Emily said as Ryan cleared the dinner plates. We've been thinking about your situation a lot lately. Ryan and I are both so busy with work, and we worry about you being alone in that big house. Oh, I manage just fine, dear. But do you, though? Ryan interjected, his voice carrying manufactured concern. Last week when we visited, you seemed confused about what day it was, and Emily mentioned you forgot about Sophie's school play until the last minute. I had forgotten no such thing. Sophie's play wasn't until next month, but I nodded uncertainly. Did I? Sometimes the days do run together. They exchanged the kind of meaningful glance that said, "See, we told you so." Emily leaned forward, taking my hand with theatrical gentleness. We've been researching some options that might give you more support. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or maintaining a house. Where there would always be people around if you needed help. You mean a nursing home? I asked, letting my voice carry just the right note of confused fear. Senior living communities, Ryan corrected smoothly. Much more modern and comfortable than the old-fashioned nursing homes. We've visited several, and some of them are really quite nice. But I don't want to leave my house. Patrick and I were so happy there. I know, Mom, but Patrick's gone, and we have to think about what's safest for you now. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Emily and Ryan taking turns presenting their arguments with the patient persistence of people cornering wounded prey. They had statistics about falls in elderly homes, stories about neighbors who'd discovered confused seniors wandering in their pajamas, gentle reminders about my increasing forgetfulness and episodes of disorientation. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, designed to make me feel helpless and grateful for their intervention. If I hadn't known the truth about their motivations, I might have been genuinely moved by their apparent concern. Instead, I was coldly furious at the sophisticated cruelty of their performance. When Sophie finally came downstairs for dessert, the mask slipped slightly. Emily was sharp with her about homework completion, and Ryan barely acknowledged her presence. My granddaughter sat quietly beside me, picking at her ice cream while the adults continued their carefully scripted discussion about my needs. "Grandma," Sophie whispered when Emily stepped away to answer her phone. "Are you really sick?" "Not at all, sweetheart," I whispered back. "Sometimes grown-ups worry about things that aren't really problems." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd caught our exchange but couldn't hear the words. When Emily returned, she suggested it was Sophie's bedtime, despite the fact that it was barely 7:45. "Say goodnight to Grandma, honey. She needs to get home and rest." As Sophie hugged me goodbye, I slipped a small note into her hand. "Read this when you're alone," I whispered against her ear. "Don't let anyone else see it." The note contained a simple message. "If you ever need help, call this number, day or night. I love you, Grandma." Below it was my cell phone number, which neither Emily nor Ryan possessed. After Sophie disappeared upstairs, Emily and Ryan moved into the final phase of their assault. They had brochures, They explained, for 3 different facilities. All of them offered immediate placement for families facing urgent situations. All of them could be toured tomorrow, if I was interested. "We just want what's best for you, Mom," Emily said, her eyes glistening with what appeared to be genuine tears. "We're scared that something might happen to you when you're alone. We couldn't live with ourselves if—" "Let me think about it," I said finally, gathering my purse and standing slowly. "This is all very sudden." "Of course," Ryan said quickly, "but maybe we could visit 1 or 2 places this week just to see what's available." "Perhaps. Thank you for dinner, both of you, and for caring so much about my welfare." They walked me to the door with expressions of relief barely concealed behind continued concern. They thought they'd successfully planted the seeds of acceptance. They believed their helpless victim was beginning to see the wisdom of surrender. As I drove away from their house, I allowed myself a smile that would have terrified them both. In 3 days, I would own the house next door. By next week, Sophie would have a $4 million trust fund that guaranteed her independence from their failures, and tonight's recorded conversation would provide devastating evidence of their premeditated scheme to defraud and abuse an elderly family member. Emily had asked what was best for me. Tomorrow, she was going to start finding out exactly what that looked like. And it wasn't going to be anything like what she'd imagined. Friday afternoon, I stood in the driveway of 18 Maple Street, keys to my new home gleaming in the Virginia sunshine. The closing had taken exactly 47 minutes a record, according to the real estate agent, who seemed stunned by my all-cash offer and complete lack of negotiation. Emily's house sat directly across the small side street, close enough that I could see into their kitchen window, close enough to watch Sophie's school bus arrive each afternoon, close enough to ensure that my granddaughter would never again face neglect or abandonment without someone fighting for her. I'd timed my arrival perfectly. Emily's silver Honda pulled into her driveway at 3:20, right on schedule. She was chatting on her phone, completely oblivious to the moving truck parked in front of what had been the Hendersons' house just 1 week ago. It took her almost 10 minutes to notice the activity. I watched from my new front window as she ended her call and stared at the truck, confusion evident even from a distance. When the movers carried out my distinctive burgundy sofa, the one she'd helped me pick out 3 years ago, Emily's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto her driveway. She was running across the street before I could even reach my front door. "Mom." Her voice carried disbelief and growing panic. "What? What are you doing here?" "Moving in, dear. I bought the house. Closed this morning." Emily's face cycled through confusion, shock, and dawning horror as the implications hit her. "You bought. But how I mean. Where did you get the money for—" "Questions for later," I said pleasantly. "Ryan should be home soon, shouldn't he? And Sophie will want to see how close her grandmother lives now. We'll have so much more time together." "Mom, we need to talk. This is crazy. You can't just buy a house without discussing it with family." "Can't I? I'm 48 years old. Emily, not 84. I'm perfectly capable of making my own real estate decisions." The front door of Emily's house slammed, and Ryan appeared, his face already dark with anger. He'd clearly been watching from their window, calculating the disaster this represented for their carefully laid plans. "What the hell is this about, Margaret?" he demanded, striding across the street with none of his usual false politeness. "Language, Ryan, and it's about proximity. You've both been so concerned about my welfare, so worried about me living alone. Now you'll never have to worry again. I'll be right here, watching over all of you." The word "watching" hung in the air like a threat, which was exactly how I'd intended it. "This is insane," Ryan continued. "You can't afford a house like this. Where did you get the money?" I smiled the same serene smile I'd perfected over 3 years of widowhood. "From the same place I'll get the money for Sophie's college fund, her wedding expenses, and anything else my granddaughter needs. You'd be surprised what a careful woman can accumulate over the years. Emily was staring at me as if I'd transformed into someone she'd never seen before, which, in a way, I had. "How much money are we talking about, Mom?" "Enough," I said simply. "More than enough. Thomas Blake has all the details. If you're genuinely curious about my financial capacity rather than my supposed incapacity." The reference to our family lawyer sent another wave of alarm across both their faces. Ryan grabbed Emily's arm, already pulling her back toward their house for what would undoubtedly be a frantic strategy session. "We're not done talking about this," he called over his shoulder. "Oh, but we are," I replied. "At least, we're done talking about nursing homes and incompetency hearings and midnight commitments. Those conversations are permanently off the table." They froze mid-stride. Emily turned back to face me, her skin pale with shock. "How did you know about your plans? The same way I know about your debt, your mortgage default, your search for cut-rate care facilities, and your consultation with Dr. Williams about providing false medical testimony. Did you really think you could plot against me without consequences?" Ryan's face had gone from angry red to ashen gray. "You can't prove any of that." I pulled out my phone and played a snippet of Tuesday night's dinner conversation, their voices crystal clear as they discussed my supposed confusion and disorientation. "Actually, I can prove all of it. Every phone call, every email, every meeting with nursing home administrators. It's amazing what a good private investigator can discover when money is no object." Emily sank onto their front steps, the weight of complete defeat visible in her posture. "Mom, we can explain. We were just worried about you, and the finances were so tight." "Save your explanations for someone who might believe them," I said, my voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You have a choice now. You can continue down the path you've chosen. Lies, manipulation, attempts to control my life and discover exactly how expensive that becomes. Or you can remember that you're my daughter and Sophie is my granddaughter, and start behaving like family members who deserve my love and support." "What does that mean?" Ryan demanded. "It means Sophie will never again eat cereal for dinner because you're too distracted to cook. It means my granddaughter will never again walk home from school alone because you're too busy plotting against me to provide basic parental care. It means you treat me with the respect I've earned over 48 years of life. Or you discover what it's like to face the world without any safety net at all." I gestured toward my new house, where the movers were carrying in boxes of financial documents that represented more wealth than Emily and Ryan had ever imagined. "I'll be right here, watching over all of you, every day, every decision, every choice you make about how to treat the people who should matter most to you." Sophie's school bus rounded the corner, and I could see my granddaughter's face pressed against the window, her eyes wide with amazement at seeing the moving truck and her grandmother standing in a new driveway. "Now," I said, smoothing my cardigan and walking toward the bus stop, "let me go tell Sophie about her new neighbor." As I crossed the street to greet my granddaughter, I heard Emily's voice behind me, broken and desperate. "Ryan, how much money do you think she actually has?" His answer was lost in the sound of the school bus doors opening and Sophie's delighted squeal of, "Grandma!" But it didn't matter. They would find out soon enough exactly what they'd been foolish enough to threaten. From my new front window, I would have a perfect view of their house, their comings and goings, their successes and failures. Sophie would never again face neglect while I lived and breathed. And Emily and Ryan would spend every day for the rest of their lives knowing that their actions had consequences they never saw coming. The war was over. I had won completely. And the best part was, they would never again underestimate Margaret Doyle. Thank you so much for listening to this story of family, betrayal, and the sweet satisfaction of well-deserved justice. I'd love to hear from you. Please comment and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect with fellow story lovers around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Margaret's revenge. Was it justified? Or did she go too far? I'm curious to hear your perspective.